Let us pray. Lord God, God of steadfastness and encouragement, grant us that we might live in harmony with one another. Lord, fill us with all joy and peace in believing in you, that we in our lives may abound in hope through the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Well, good morning again.
Good morning.
Hey, Rachel, you're getting a hang of that talking back. I like it. Good morning. Happy Advent to you. Of course, this second Sunday of Advent is really rich with themes, our Advent themes. Of course, the Advent theme of preparing, getting ready for Jesus. Also, we get, of course, this wonderful character of John the Baptist, which for me always these days brings back memory of Dick Smith being here with us when he acted out that part a couple of years ago. It's a wonderful time. And also, today, however, not just that, but I want to add a couple more. The Mandalorian and a Jesuit priest to the mix. Now, The Mandalorian, many of you won't know what I'm talking about, but some of you may know what it's a TV series that's being released by Disney. It's a Star Wars series. And now, I'm not a Star Wars guru, I have to admit. But my 18-year-old daughter, she is, and she knows my language. She said, "Dad, this is sort of like the Wild West of Star Wars." She knew my language, so she got me sucked in, and I've loved it. So I thought I wanted to share a bit with you about it. So The Mandalorian is a story about this man who's a soldier, a warrior, clad in armor from head to toe, and he goes about kicking butt, and he gets drawn into saving innocent lives and doing the right thing. Think Clint Eastwood in The Pale Rider, right? And you got it. But you never see the guy's face. It's always covered in this helmet. It turns out that this guy, when he was a child, his parents were killed by raiders, and he was left there alone as a boy to die. And the Mandalorian took him in, and they saved his life. The Mandalorian were a people of a particular way of life, a way of living, a particular rule. It was the soldier's way, the warrior's way. And so they gave him this rule of life and gave him identity and safety. And the number one rule for the Mandalorian, one of the number one rules, is that you can never take your helmet off in front of another person. So it turns out in this little tender moment that you find out that since this man was a child, no one had ever looked upon his face. And in that moment, I'm telling you, it just makes sense. Immediately it makes sense, because although you can't see his face, the directors have made it so that in his voice and in his actions, you can hear this great sense of worthlessness. You knew that he just didn't see any value in himself as an individual. He didn't know he mattered at all. He just went through the motions. It was a great depression. The thing that once seemed to be saving his life and giving him an identity, this rule, this armor, the mask of the Mandalorian now was smothering the life out of him, robbing any chance for real identity. Reverend Marshall Prager is the one who got me thinking about the parallel here when he gave his Advent talk this past Wednesday. Wonderful talk. It's when Marshall told a story about another man that he knew who hadn't seen his face since he was a child. It was a Jesuit priest friend of his. And because when the Jesuit priest was a boy, he lost his eyesight. He became blind. So one day, the Jesuit priest, a full-grown man now, he stood up in front of the congregation and to deliver the children's homily. You know how those things are. And the children gather around, and when the kids look up at him, like kids do, they say, "Hey, you're blind." Right? You know how kids do. And he says, "Well, yes, I'm blind." She says, "Well, you don't even know what you look like." And he says, "Well, I haven't been blind my whole life, but I know pretty much that's right." She says, "Well, mister, you're beautiful. Mister, you're beautiful." It was like music to his ears, echoed in his head probably for the rest of his life. Let's hope. She had said these words that in his heart he had longed to know was true about him, something that he had forgotten about himself, and that he just couldn't remember. He couldn't claim for himself. He couldn't do it himself. And it brought peace and love to his heart to hear it, something he had forgotten. My friends, we too have forgotten. We've forgotten who we are. We've forgotten who we are, and we are lost. In 1 Colossians, first chapter, verse 21, Paul says, he explains that once we were alienated from God and were an enemy to God in our minds because of our evil behavior. In our minds, he says, and then he explains that no, you're not an enemy in actuality. You're beautiful. You are beautiful. Even when you don't see it, God does. The Advent question, the question of this season before Christmas is, are you ready? Are you ready to be found? Are you ready? Are you ready to remember? To remember who it is that you are and who it is you can trust to tell you who it is you are. A little more and a little more. Are we ready? I know we're hungry to do it. We're hungry. I know we're hungry because we're hungry to live more freely. We're hungry for a deeper sense of peace. I don't care how old or young you are or how long you've been on the Christian walk. We want more peace, more purpose, more freedom, but are we ready for it? So I want you to remember the story of the Mandalorian and this Jesuit priest, because I now want to teach you a little something about the Bible, to show you something along the way here about this story of John the Baptist. And that is this John the Baptist story that we just read is actually the New Testament's Exodus story. I don't know if you're aware of that, but in symbolism, in a very real way, we heard the new Exodus according to the New Testament. So think about the original Exodus. Where are the children of Israel in the original Exodus? I'm really asking someone.
Bondage.
Bondage where? In Egypt. So you said them both. Very good. Bondage in Egypt. And they're mistreated. And they're beaten down and they're calling out in their slavery for God's help. But we also know that they've grown very comfortable too. It's not that they grew comfort with pain, but they knew what the system was like. It was the known. They knew what to expect. We hear this years later. They longed for their years of slavery whenever things got tough later on. But so God sends Moses in, and he calls the people out into the wilderness, right? To a new way of living, into the wilderness, and he calls them through the Red Sea, the parting of the Red Sea. Do you remember that? Well, now here comes John the Baptist. Here comes John the Baptist, and again he calls Israel out into the wilderness, right? And he calls them out into the wilderness, out from their bondage, into the wilderness through the waters of the Red Sea. It's through the waters of baptism. See, baptism was an initiation ritual that relived that moment in history of the Red Sea for them. Literally, this is God's new exodus for his people, calling them out of bondage. Here John stands in the wilderness, right? This is like the Mandalorian too, if you can see it. Here John stands in the wilderness. And when you hear wilderness in the Bible, you know it's a land, an untamed land, a land of uncertainty. It's a land outside the walls in which you feel safe and sound and secure, outside your armor. It's in the wilderness. It's a vulnerable place. And here John stands in the wilderness, and he calls into the walls of Jerusalem, into their safe and sound lives, and he calls them out of their slavery into this new way of life. He calls out, he says, people of God, that which you are trusting to save you has become your captor. That which you are trusting to defend you is smothering the life out of you, right? This is what he calls. He calls you to stop putting trust in things that are killing you. He calls them out of their comfortable living. It's comfortable living that leaves you lost, so often crying out in desperation and confusion, to a new way of living, a wilderness living. A wilderness living. For it is upon this wilderness living that we are prepared to receive the good news of Jesus. And that's why this is preparing the way for Jesus. For this wilderness living. That is where you find you trust nothing but the Messiah. Jesus. To tell you who you are. I know that may sound overly religious to us. When I read those words this week, I thought, man, that's not going to resonate with most of us here. To live a life where you trust in nothing but Jesus. Sounds like you'd be so heavenly minded, you'd be no earthly good, right? I know, but we must remember that life is not a destination. You're not expected to be at the destination with our God, but it's a journey. You're expected to travel the journey and take the next step. This is the reality in which we live, and we can't change that. This lesson about John, it's not surprising, I think, at all that some people were not ready. People were not ready to respond. Right? The brood of vipers. The people were not ready. I don't think that's... What's surprising is that anyone actually listened. Right? I think that this man who didn't have any power or success, it's not like they looked at him and said, hey, I want to be like that guy. The guy in the camel's hair eating locusts. Right? No. Why did they... I mean, we know why they didn't. Why they weren't ready to listen. We know why they weren't ready. It seems like every week. This week, twice. I have conversations with people about their loved ones. This week was a dear friend and a child. And who are addicted to alcohol and drugs. And in their addiction, they try to help. We try to help, and we find out they're just not ready. And we know that it's going to take them hitting a terrible bottom. And we hope and pray that it is not too low, right? They don't have to be taken too low. But my friends, our addictions are the same reasons why we're not ready. You see, all addictions are not as disgusting socially as sexual addiction, drug addiction, and alcohol addiction. No, we have our own addictions. So we shouldn't judge. We have our own addictions. We are addicted to being popular. We're addicted to being successful. We're addicted to being powerful. Now, don't think politicians. When I think powerful, I think of my junior high bus driver. Man, he was power hungry. He was addicted, and if you broke his power, he had a terrible day. You know, he was so captive to the addiction of power. We're addicted to power. We're addicted to gossip. Don't fool yourself. We're addicted to gossip. We're addicted to winning. We're addicted to even our suffering, like the Israelites. Like it's only us or me. I'm not belittling our suffering, please. The question is, will we see our addictions? And how much of our lives will we let them smother out of us? We know they will continue, but how much? Will we hear the call of Advent, the call of truth? And let God prepare us for His Son. So that when the next moment arises on our journey, and you have the choice to take a step out of your comfortable addictions and habits and be seen and live, will we do it and receive life more fully, more truly? You know, I'm working with a new definition of peace these days from Stanley Hauerwas. The peace, and it describes peace as being not a stagnant thing, a passive thing. But peace is the process in which we make our time, our own. Instead of allowing our time to be determined by these allegedly uncontrollable events. So let me say it again. Peace is making our time our own. It's the process of giving things to God, making our time our own so they're not determined by some allegedly uncontrollable events. That's what John the Baptist is calling you to, and me to. This process of claiming the hours of our life as our own, not letting them be defined by what comes quick and easy. I hope you can hear how relevant this message of John the Baptist is for us in our society, and how deeply we are addicted to our comforts of our lives. So much so that if God calls us to something uncomfortable, we say, it can't be God. I mean, if I'm discerning to do something, I'm on my way and I have a flat tire. Well, God must not want me to do that, right? But now wait a minute. That's not our God. When we process sin, we follow what? The cross. We follow the way of the cross, the way of suffering. No. We must stop. Stop thinking that God calls us to comfort instead of truth. John the Baptist comes and calls us out. Don't let it take hitting another bottom. Don't let it take your addictions leading you to another bottom to come out of your comforts and live in wilderness living so that I can give you life and peace and love. So it's not surprising that many people didn't follow John. But what is surprising is that some people could, and I think maybe that's a more helpful and practical thing to consider for a moment. How was it that people actually followed this ragamuffin in the woods? How were they ready to actually do that with their lives? I think you know. I think you know. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. God had been working on them. In their individual lives, God had been working on them. Right? You know how He'd been working on them. Is that question in your chest? Is that hunger for purpose and meaning and truth? It's that God-shaped holes, Lewis would say. It's that dissatisfaction with the answers that religion gives you. And you don't want religion, you want truth. You want a religion only if it is one who humbly seeks the truth. Even in their success, and perhaps especially in their failure, God had been working on them, leading them to houses of worship, to prayer, preparing them to humbly answer His call. God, through everyday life, through the ups and downs, had been making them ready to come out of their comfort zones, from behind their mask into the truth, into the wilderness of real life. How about us? Isn't God, through life, really trying to get us to wake up and remember? Remember who we are. Can't we feel that in how sick and tired we are of the slavery of our comforts at times? Are you ready to come out of your comfort zones? So what comfort zones? Before I end, I have to at least say, what comfort zones? Well, I have to say that this is something that you have to determine for yourself, what your comfort zones are. There's a reason why we use the Apostles' Creed for the rest of Advent instead of the Nicene Creed. The Apostles' Creed, which we'll follow, we'll say this in a moment, is I believe. This sort of Advent preparation is an I believe sort of thing. This is something God has to do within you to prepare your heart. We do it together, but it is with you and God. So you have to figure out, but try these on for size. What comfort zones? How about your depression? Aren't you really ready to truly trust that you are beautiful? So much that you can actually talk to someone about your depression and your mental illness to get help. Aren't you really ready to stop trusting the lie that it's only you? And if anyone knew how messy your life is, that they wouldn't love you, that they'd lose respect for you, other than have commonality with you and be built up by your courage? You tired of listening to the lie that says you're not beautiful? How about this? Aren't you ready to lay down your lie of perfectionism? Boy, that's a comfortable one. The rat race. Aren't you ready to stop sidelining your faith? Making time for the gym, but not for God, even though you deeply need Him? I think this is probably one of the largest comfort zones when I'm reflecting about this week. One of the largest comfort zones of our society today is AI. Now, I don't mean artificial intelligence, although it's a type of that. It's agnostic indifference. I mean, I can say that because I've traveled through those waters myself, but the being stuck with agnostic indifference about our faith and about our belief, where you piece together all these bits and pieces of world religions, when you haven't invested yourself in understanding it, then you take a piece of Christianity, which sounds obviously ridiculous, and you put it in, and you know a little, and listen, humbly seek the truth. And that truth will call you out of your AI, and it will call you by the name of Jesus Christ. Aren't you ready to stop acting like your addictions are not a problem, and answer that call of John the Baptizer. I know I am. Hope you'll join me this Advent in seeking each and every day to do yourself what he calls us. John the Baptizer gives our community, our world, what we are simply desperate to hear. He calls us out of the wilderness, out into the wilderness of true living. Lay it down. Lay it down and pick him up. It's difficult. It's striking. It's difficult. Not to trust in the very thing that keeps killing you and hurting you. But remember this. You are beautiful. It's who you are. God loves you. Now it's time to get ready. Ready yourself for the next opportunity to trust in him and live into that, your true identity. Amen.